I'm Gary Shapiro, and I am the CEO of the Consumer Technology Association. We are a national trade association of American companies, 1,300, and we own and produce CES, which is well known in Las Vegas. It's the largest business event in the world. Over 4,300 companies exhibited at our last one, and we had over 138,000 actually people that came, including 54,000 from outside the United States. It's the world's largest innovation event, and of course, our mission is focused on innovation and technology. It's what we do. We're a nonprofit 501c6. It's a non-governmental organization, and we want to make the world better. We actually partner with the United Nations on fundamental human security, such as right to food, right to clean air, clean water, as well as right to health care. These are fundamental human securities, and they added one at our request less than a year ago at a press conference we had at the United Nations the day the United General Assembly opened, and it's the right to access technology. But of course, we know that technology, like any tool since the invention of the wheel and gunpowder and you name it, they're just tools, and they can have bad uses and they could have good uses. And it's up to us as society and government to work together and figure out how we could balance the good uses and focus on the bad uses to minimize them. But the nature of humankind is this is a discussion that goes on all along, from how we create homes with sprinklers in them that are mandated, or cars with seat belts in them, or things. So there's always a discussion, a tension between taking advantage of the good things and minimizing the bad things. And that's what this is a little bit of a discussion about. And this is an opportunity for our members, many of whom are here, and other stakeholders to hear directly from senior government officials. It is part of an ongoing series. We'd have a number of senior government leaders here with different parts of administrative responsibility, both Democrat and responsibility, have focus on everything from antitrust to broadband to supply chain, as well as cybersecurity. As a trade association, we are a voice on consumer connected device security. We have a goal in this area. It's to effectively promote secure connected devices, avoid introducing vulnerabilities into our nation's wireless networks, and to keep the U.S. a global leader and innovator. That is one of the most important. Actually, they're all very important, but keeping the U.S. as a global leader is something we focus on as an organization in many different ways. We are proud to support the Biden-Harris administration's efforts to establish the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark program, which will help consumers actually make some more informed purchasing decisions on their connected IoT devices. We've seen different examples of voluntary government industry programs, whether it's Energy Star or certainly some of the markings on energy usage or gas usage or things like that, efficiency standards. Some are mandatory, some are standard. They're usually a cooperative effort. But we've done so many cooperative efforts to get standards in every different areas, from actually measuring steps for devices where the players have all agreed so everyone could be on an equal playing field and consumers can make good buying decisions, to measuring sleep, to even creating the back of the computer, the RS-232 standard. Who knows what that is, by the way? Okay, good. That's a CTA standard. So in July 2022, we hosted the first National Cyber Director, Chris Inglis, at our Arlington, Virginia headquarters, and senior members of the ONCD team have previously attended CES, which of course is the most powerful tech event in the world. We know that. And we invite you want to continue the trend, so the fact that you're here today means you have enough of a business interest to be qualified to attend CES 2025, January 7th through 10th in Las Vegas. Our website will go live on August 28th, and you could see there all the announcements we have to make then. So today we are absolutely thrilled to welcome the second National Cyber Director, Howie Coker Jr., who was confirmed by the U.S. Senate in December. He's been working to implement the President's National Cybersecurity Strategy, including the National Cyber Workforce and Education Strategy. He's a retired CIA senior executive and career naval officer. He's a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and the Naval Postgraduate School. But more significantly than all that is what Michael Patricone, and as well as our guest speaker and I share. Does anyone know what that is? We are all graduates from the nation's best law school, Georgetown University Law School. So I want to welcome National Cyber Director Coker to the podium for his remarks. And following his remarks, He will sit down for a fireside chat with CTA's Vice President of Policy and Regulatory Affairs, David Grossman. Welcome. Good luck. Or should I give this to you?
We'll go without it for a minute.
You
I'll hold it.
They made me wear it.
You all can hear me. But thank you, Gary, for the remarks. All we got to do now is get the Supreme Court Justice from Georgetown. We'll be okay. Oh, yeah. It's going to take a while. But really a pleasure to be here with CTA and look forward to our discussion in a moment. As noted, I've had the honor of serving as National Cyber Director for just about 8 months now, and I've come to appreciate even more so the leadership of the inaugural National Cyber Director, Chris Inglis, just a great American, and he set this team on a path to where ONCD delivers for our nation. We owe that to Chris Inglis in large part and to the staff that I had the good fortune of inheriting. And with regards to the staff, really our first priority, of course, is to execute the President's National Cybersecurity Strategy that was signed out last year. And that strategy really does hold a bold vision and articulates the path forward to achieve a future that supports the cybersecurity and resilience of the technologies and systems that really underlie our way of life. And I've been putting more and more emphasis on resilience in addition to cybersecurity as I learn more about the challenges that we face and the persistence and skills of our adversaries. But the President's strategy calls for two fundamental shifts in how we approach cybersecurity. And the first one is shifting the responsibility, not the burden, but shifting the responsibility of defending cyberspace from those that are least capable, individual end users, schools, and the like, and shifting that responsibility, and also small businesses, but also shifting that responsibility to large institutions, both private sector and public sectors, like the federal government, like big tech, because we are more capable of upholding that responsibility. The second major shift in the National Cybersecurity Strategy is realigning incentives to favor long-term investment in cybersecurity, and that's a key aspect as well. So what does that mean for you all? We do urge companies to prioritize security from the earliest inception of your products. Our partners at CISA have secure by design, secure by default, and that is an imperative. So security should be woven into the very fabric of our digital ecosystem through the way we design, develop, and deploy new technologies. Moreover, those commitments to security do not end at launch of a product. It requires continuous vigilance through regular maintenance, timely updates, and prompt patching. And I have to emphasize the prompt patching. Frankly, our adversaries monitor our vulnerability reports and our patch alerts, and it's almost like the starting gun to a race. When NSA, CISA, and FBI issue these patch reports, our adversaries are watching. They know that all of us will not respond as timely as we should, and they just need to beat one of us there, and they do that with regularity, unfortunately. But this ongoing dedication that's required will ensure that products remain secure and reliable for all users, lifting the responsibility from the consumers and empowering them to trust in technology that they have to use every day. So we're marching forward thoughtfully and expeditiously to implement that National Cybersecurity Strategy. And hopefully, as you know, in May of this year, we released version 2 of the National Cybersecurity Implementation Plan. And it lays out 100 high-impact federal initiatives, and each one is intended to tangibly increase our collective digital security and system resilience. And the second version of that implementation plan actually presents 31 new initiatives. And a point that we're really proud of is that we also have 6 new departments and agencies that have volunteered to lead initiatives for the very first time. The tasks ahead are critical, and that's why we are working diligently with our partners. And we'll talk about several of these initiatives today. And as I mentioned, executing on the National Cybersecurity Strategy is one of our highest priorities. But a second area of focus that we have is tackling the long, hard-term problems that are facing the cybersecurity space in a broad manner. And before our conversation with David, I just want to spend a moment or two talking about one of our initiatives that is both a part of the strategy and one of those hard problems. The work that we have underway to promote a more secure open source software ecosystem. Open source software is both critical and transformative because of its transparency and its composability. It actually underpins much of the hardware and software that is vital to our nation's national security, our economic prosperity, and our democratic values. Most major software is built on open source components and libraries, and it really is ubiquitous across the infrastructure that we rely on every day. And we have seen the devastating effects of unsecure software. So as a part of our work in 2022, the Office of the National Cyber Director established the Open Source Software Security Initiative, OS3I, which brings federal departments and agencies together to coordinate policy solutions to better secure and defend the open source software ecosystem. And last year, 2023, the OS3I focused on 4 key areas. Number 1, unifying federal departments and agencies to speak with a single voice on open source software security. Secondly, establishing a strategic approach for the federal government's secure use of open source software. Third, encouraging long-term, sustained security investment into open source software. And fourth, engaging in building trust with open source software community members. And to engage and build that trust with the open source software community, the OS3I, ONCD, CISA, the National Science Foundation, DARPA, and OMB issued a request for information, or RFI, to gather input from the open source software community on areas that the government ought to focus on as a priority. That RFI generated over 100 substantive responses, and we have been reviewing and analyzing submissions received, and we will report on that work and the activities of the OS3I in later this year and early next year. And that will, all those recommendations will align with the input that we received from the community. Additionally, earlier this year, we released a first of its kind technical report entitled Back to Building Blocks. And it charts a path towards a secure and measurable software and outlines the ways in which the open source software ecosystem provides that unique backdrop for the examination of software measurement. That report was also written with key input from leaders in the technical community and the private sector, including some of you here today, and we appreciate that because bringing these ideas to fruition cannot be accomplished by the government alone. Just not going to happen. So thank you for your support on that one. Then the foundations of cybersecurity really are not abstract concepts. They tangibly affect us for better or for worse. The damage and destruction possible when open source software ecosystems are not secure is evident. And we just cannot lose sight of the fact that open source software community is vital to civil society and our day-to-day way of life that we have become accustomed to and frankly, that we deserve. This effort, like many in our past, requires a recognition that America is at our best when we work together. And the very nature of the problems we face tells us that we have to think about solving them differently. Policy must speak the language of those that are affected by that policy. Hence, that Building Blocks was focused on our technology community, our engineers, which again was the first of its kind. And this work needs our shared commitment, both from the government and those writing the lines of code that are so important to our national interests. The work ahead will build upon the President's leadership and the work of the Office of the National Cyber Director and the federal ecosystem in partnership with all of you to ensure a much more defensible and resilient digital foundation for all Americans. I look forward to our conversation. Thank you.
What a turnout. Director Coker, please join me for our fireside chat conversation. Thank you for your remarks. I think you've laid the foundation for covering quite a few topics today, and I think the first place we should start is the National Cybersecurity Strategy. You noted in your remarks that the original release of that was in May of last year. Version 2 of the implementation plan was released in May. Are we where you wanted to be at this stage in the process? And what has been the biggest challenge in the implementation plan?
Are we where we want to be? The staff will tell you that's an unfair question because my answer is always, we're not as far ahead as we'd like to be. That's just my perspective. I like to focus on where we need to go. We've done great things, but my focus is on what remains. So if we look back at the NCSIP, National Cybersecurity Implementation Plan version 1, we have completed, at the time of NCSIP 2, we completed 90% of the actions. That's a better score than I ever got in school. So we'll take that, but there's still 10% that we didn't get to, and that's where my focus is. And I apologize to the staff all the time. 90% is usually an A, but I focus on the 10%. Since then, we're up to 93% completion of NCS IP version 1, but we're into version 2 now and pressing forward. So we are making exceptional progress. And one of the things that I'm most pleased with is that I mentioned, I think, 5 or 6 new departments and agencies that volunteered to take on action. I'm not used to federal departments and agencies volunteering in such a transparent manner to be held accountable for delivering things that they are not totally in control of. But our partners recognize the importance of it. They recognize their core competencies, and they volunteered to help the nation move forward. So we're doing well on that front. But you all know, in cybersecurity, there is never a moment of complacency. I was in Reno, Nevada last Friday, and one of the local stations asked, "Are you ramping up cybersecurity for the election cycle?" And my comment was, we are always striving to maintain our cybersecurity posture at the highest possible level, regardless of the events. We just cannot relax in cybersecurity, and we will not relax in cybersecurity.
Well, that's a good segue to the question of investment in cybersecurity, particularly from the government. Earlier this month, together with OMB, your office released a memo outlining the administration's cybersecurity priorities for the FY26 budget. What's at the top of that priority list for you?
Well, number one, we are delighted to partner with OMB. As I mentioned, we don't get things done without partnerships, and that's a priority of public sector and private sector. OMB is a great partner in that we align the priorities in accordance with the strategy, the National Cybersecurity Strategy. And what's key, strategies can be great, but we have to have the implementation plan, which we have, but we also have to align resources to the strategy and the implementation plan. I've seen too many strategies that are well thought out, well written, well understood, but they did not have resources assigned to them. That's not the case in our partnership with OMB. So if you look at the FY 2026 Cybersecurity Priorities Memo, it's the joint between OMB and ONCD, you'll see it aligns with the 5 prongs of the strategy. So they're all important, and it's good to have that resource alignment with the strategy.
Well, one of those 5 pillars is around workforce issues, yes. And that's something I'm personally passionate about. And one of the data points identified in there is that we're going to need at least 4 million cybersecurity professionals. What ideas does your office have to fill those critical jobs?
Yes, and we have more than nearly 500,000 open cybersecurity jobs in this country. Again, back to partnership. We won't get it done without partnerships, and you ask about ideas. So in our partnership with the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, they have taken on the Herculean task of helping us, and us is the nation, shift to a skills-based approach to hiring. As opposed to the way it is right now, there are four-year degree requirements in too many job announcements. Four-year degrees are great, but they are not always necessary for all cybersecurity positions. So with OPM's leadership, they've taken on the task of, again, reviewing the largest IT management occupation series in the federal government. 2200 is the name of it. I believe there are over 100,000 positions in the federal government, and OPM, again, has committed that by June 2025, working towards shifting that entire series to skills-based hiring. And what that means, just as an example, if we drive up the road to Fort Meade, where the U.S. Cyber Command is, where the National Security Agency is, where many military members operate in cyberspace every day. Well, many of those members do not have college degrees, but they have experience in the cyberspace, taking on nation-state adversaries, taking on malicious cyber criminals. They have the skills. They may not have the degrees that some old job requirements have, but they do have the skills. And that's one way to get to that 4 million. That's one way to close that nearly 500,000 gap in open cyber positions. Other things that we are doing is the National Cyber Workforce and Education Strategy recognizes that there are a number of major actions that we need to take. One is rethinking how we educate and train cybersecurity professionals. Again, back to Reno, Nevada, University of Nevada, Reno on Friday. We were at a session sponsored by the National Science Foundation called Research Experience for Teachers, RET. And they were teaching middle and high school teachers how to prepare their curriculums to incorporate cybersecurity in their middle school and high school curriculum. So we call that in the military, train the trainers. They were teaching the teachers. And this fall, those teachers will go back to their schools and better prepare the upcoming generation to help us defend cyberspace. So those are just a couple of ideas on how we can advance the cybersecurity workforce.
I think that it's great to hear, particularly the recognition around non-traditional opportunities in the college age range, and also just what you're doing at the middle school, because it does start long before someone turns 18.
It does, and pardon me, when you mention non-traditional, that reminds me of another significant move that we're making with our partners. We're actually going to have a White House convening this week on military veterans and their spouses. Yeah. Cybersecurity is a field that does lend itself to remote work, and given our military members and their spouses typically move and relocate every 2 or 3 or 4 years, we think it's an ideal opportunity for us to leverage military spouses so they can also serve with their loved ones.
So I want to pick up on another theme that I've noticed in your remarks and also so far in our chat, which is the collaboration, particularly with other agencies within the government, because we know, and certainly our team at CTA deals with a number of federal agencies on cybersecurity, whether it's the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Communications Commission, Department of Homeland Security. We could go through the alphabet list of agencies. In your role as the National Cyber Director, what is your office doing to try to coordinate all those different agencies?
And you said it, collaboration. We really, I almost said try, but we do. We lead via collaboration. we are not worried about who gets credit as long as the mission is advanced. We're after positive mission outcomes as opposed to good press. That's what we want to do. We make clear to our partners that the outcomes is what we're focused on, and we just want to help move it forward. You mentioned a number of federal partners. Just yesterday afternoon, I think it was, I was down at FCC meeting with the chairwoman there, talking about our common mission space. This morning, could have been early this afternoon, literally I hosted the administrator of TSA, talking about our common mission space and actually some ongoing legislative things that we are teaming with. On the drive here, our staff was talking about an event in mid-August where I'll be sitting with my counterpart from the National Security Council, and then we'll be followed by the senior FBI cyber rep and the director of CISA. So we meet regularly, and I don't want to give anyone the impression that we agree on everything. Frankly, that would be a bad thing. But we can speak, frankly, forthrightly, and we trust each other that we're moving for the same objectives. So a key part of our job is bringing coherence to the federal cybersecurity ecosystem. There's a lot of capability. We can be effective, but we need to be effective and efficient, and that's what we're striving to do.
From a private sector perspective, I can't tell you how important that is to have the U.S. government speaking with one voice. Really, from a regulatory compliance and everything that our company's doing to have a consistent message on cybersecurity, and I would think also from an international perspective as well.
Absolutely. And in this position, I do get to host, along with our State Department CDP Ambassador at Large Nate Fick. We regularly have our allied partners come visit us, and almost all of them talk about the need for leadership in cyberspace by the United States in general, but in particular, they also talk about regulatory harmonization for the benefit of multinational corporations, especially, but even their own companies. So they're looking to us to lead in general, but that is a particular area, regulatory harmonization, that they are hoping that we can help lead our allies in.
So let's stick to that topic of international coordination. The National Cyber Strategy called for a rebalancing of responsibility, tasking the U.S.'s largest and most capable stakeholders with shouldering a greater share of the burden for cyber risk. That cybersecurity inequity is even more prominent on the world stage. However, with some smaller nations' entire governments falling victim to ransomware, recognizing that our digital ecosystem extends beyond geographic borders, what can and should be done to rebalance the burden of responsibility abroad and strengthen our global cyber commons?
Well, an example of what is being done is the counter ransomware initiative led by our friends and partners at the National Security Council. If we were to look at the 2023 Cybersecurity Posture Report of the United States that we released earlier this summer, it talked about the strategic environment that we operate in, and we is international. And that strategic environment is marked by interconnectivity, complexity, and competition. And we should not lose sight of any of those three characteristics: complexity, interconnectivity, and competition. That's the strategic environment. The threats that have evolved from that strategic environment, again, that affect us globally, are number one, threats to critical infrastructure. Yes, American critical infrastructure is under unacceptable risk, but so is the critical infrastructure of our partners. So that's number one. Cybercrime, the increase there, in particular ransomware, as you noted, that impacts all of us. The complexity of dealing with supply chain and the risk that is there. And then commercial spyware. And as you talked about, technology has pros and cons. Artificial intelligence, the revolutionary technology that is in the hands of individuals. Again, pros and cons, but we have to consider that, and that's the trend that we're concerned about. So with our allies and under the leadership of Ambassador Fick at State Department CDP, we're continuing to, number one, share information, share intelligence with our partners so that they have a better understanding of the threats. We were pleased on 31 January of this year to testify on the Hill, along with Director of FBI Ray, Director of CISA Jen Easterly, and then Director NSA Commander of U.S. Cyber Command General Nakasone, and talked about the threats posed by the People's Republic of China to our critical infrastructure. Director Ray proudly and justifiably made the announcement that day the FBI-led takedown of a Chinese obfuscation network that had again placed American critical infrastructure at unacceptable risk. So making the public here in America and worldwide aware of those threats is an early foundational step that we have to do to bridge some of those international partnerships. A few months later, I spoke at Cyber UK, and we were asked to be bold and explicit in articulating the cyber threats posed by some of our adversaries, which we did. And their point was, too many nations consider these threats to be American problems or Western problems, and that is so far from reality. Our adversaries are going after our partners as well, and our partners need to recognize that. Many of them do. So we are helping to develop capability and capacity with our partners. I'll actually be going down to Costa Rica in September for the Latin America CISO conference, and that is again to help our allies understand the threats and focus on developing the capabilities that are necessary to go against these nation-state actors and malicious cyber criminals.
You certainly have a busy travel schedule.
Yes, indeed.
I did want to emphasize a point you'd made about the role of technology, both good and bad, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, particularly in the area of AI, the role that can play, particularly on threat detection. So there's a lot of good there, and many of our companies are at the forefront of that.
Absolutely, and these pros and cons should not make us fearful of these capabilities that are brought forward, in this case by AI. What needs to happen is we need to instill our values into the development of AI capabilities, guardrails, if you will, respecting democratic values. Unlike some of our adversaries, that they will not have those same values instilled in their AI capabilities, but frankly, that's part of being American. We realize we're not on a level playing field when it comes to those values, and that's okay.
You heard Gary in his opening remarks talk about CTA, who we represent, North American-based companies, but the reality is our members operate in a global supply chain. How can companies from Five Eyes nations better coordinate with ONCD? Will there be more international events comparable to the International Counter Ransomware Initiative, other pathways to allow Five Eyes-based entities to further their relationship with ONCD and contribute to the shared cybersecurity interests?
I think the answer to all those is yes, because we realize, I say openly, that the federal government alone will not solve our cybersecurity challenges, period, or exclamation mark. We need the private sector partners, we need civil society. We can call that whole of government initially, and then it moved on to whole of nation. Now, from my perspective, it's whole of nations. Like-minded nations need to continue to partner. So on the Five Eyes front, we're actually working with our partners to develop a playbook for Five Eyes in cybersecurity. I spent a few great years of my career at the National Security Agency, and the Five Eyes partnerships there is a strength of that agency and Cyber Command as well. So we understand the value, the capabilities, and the capacity that our Five Eyes nation bring forward. You mentioned the Counter Ransomware Initiative. That's going to continue to advance, frankly, more broad than just the Five Eyes, although that's the nucleus, if you will. But we're going to continue to expand. Why? Because the threat is there to our Five Eyes partners, and there's no boundaries when it comes to cybersecurity.
That's great to hear. I'm going to turn now to one of those agency partners. You mentioned that you had just met with the FCC chairwoman this week. There is something very important happening at the FCC that CTA cares quite about, and that's the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark program. You heard Gary mention that. It's a voluntary program aimed at giving consumers more information about the cybersecurity of the connected devices they buy. How can the White House support agencies like the FCC, CISA, on consumer education so that consumers not only know about the program, but understand what the mark represents in terms of cybersecurity? And can you give any insights into when you think the mark will start to appear on products?
Yep. We are partnering across the EOP, Executive Office of the President, and with FCC on Cyber Trust Mark. Why? Because it benefits consumers and will, frankly, enhance our overall national security and our economic prosperity. So we are strong proponents of that. My colleagues, again, at National Security Council were the impetus behind the Cyber Trust Mark, and we're continuing to advocate for that, frankly, in our budget deliberations, the White House and elsewhere around town. We recognize the importance of that. So we're going to do that. And how can we help it? Again, trying to get additional resources, but also to make more of America aware of it. We talked just a bit ago about international partners. They're very interested in that as well. So we're going to continue to move that forward. A potential way of doing that, and it is consistent with that second shift in the National Cybersecurity Strategy, incentivizing long-term investment in cybersecurity and resilience. That's just one means of doing that. Another potential means is what we call conditions of participation. For example, if Company X wanted to pursue a particular contract, well, the contract owner, if you will, might have conditions of participation. Hey, if you're going to provide these components, well, these components have to have satisfied the requirements of the Cyber Trust Mark. That's a way of looking at advancing that cause. Another potential way is on cyber insurance. You know, that's an area of focus for us, cyber insurance. Well, perhaps the insurance market can also use these conditions of participation. For example, if you have components that meet the Cyber Trust Mark requirements, you might get a break on the premiums. So again, incentivizing this long-term investment is what we're trying to advance. I haven't been avoiding your question of when. I just don't have a solid answer for that.
Well, let me thank you for everything your office is doing to support that program, and the key being a public-private partnership. And that really is so important. There's a lot of expertise at CTA among our industry members on consumer-facing programs, how to reach the consumer. And let's be honest, cybersecurity isn't always at the tip of the tongue for most consumers, so we have to make it digestible.
And thank you for your partnership and the expertise. We're not at all shy about seeking input from CTA or others, so don't wait for us to call. If you have something that we're not doing so well or that we need to focus on, please let us know. That, you know, Chris Inglis set the tone of collaboration in our office. He set the tone for an open door for input that we value, not just so we can say we talked to somebody, but so we can actually implement the best of the ideas that are brought forward.
We really appreciate that. Well, I'll start with one issue on that list. As I understand, there's an ONCD-led effort to develop a safe harbor for secure software development. How does this work relate to our members who are the world's leading consumer device manufacturers and who leverage software on hardware? Has the ONCD considered expanding this work to explore how to establish an earned safe harbor for those manufacturers who meet the cybersecurity requirements necessary to obtain the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark?
Yes, and a couple of months ago we had a convening on software liability, as an example. And we met with the legal academic community to get their ideas on various options for consideration on software liability. A safe harbor was one of those concepts, being that if an entity meets some level of private sector cybersecurity standards or requirements, they ought to have a safe harbor. It's all about meeting a certain baseline level of cybersecurity requirements. If we're saying this is the minimum ought to be good enough, and there ought to be a safe harbor associated with that.
Really happy to hear that. I think our members in the room would agree. You've heard this mentioned a couple times today, which is that 80% of CTA's members are small and medium-sized businesses. We have some of them here in the room. For our early-stage startups, what advice would you give them to ensure they're protecting their company and customers from cyber attacks? How can larger entities, both the government and larger companies, help to support those efforts?
You know, a fundamental recommendation has to do with too much of what I've seen in some entities, public and private sector, who view cybersecurity as an inconvenience. It is not an inconvenience, it is an imperative. Again, exclamation mark, it's an imperative. Many of these entities, public and private sector, are focused on what they call their main lines of business. Well, today, your main line of business does not get accomplished without cybersecurity. That has to be a starting point. And again, no days off. It's an investment that we have to take. Now, it's a challenging area. This morning, we met with the chief cybersecurity officer of a major corporation, and that individual and their team were talking about how they have to rely on some of the OEMs and have to trust their cybersecurity before they accept their products. So that challenge is recognized. Likewise, with the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, they're concerned about subcontractors and whether those subs are willing to make the necessary investment, whether they have the capability to make the necessary investment, whether they recognize the need to make that investment. An interesting concept that was presented a few months ago was this cyber poverty line, and it's relevant to the question. Cyber poverty line. Thesis was that the company's revenue is above this line, X billion dollars. Then they had the wherewithal to adequately invest in cybersecurity. And the folks actually said that our adversaries recognize, grossly, this cyber poverty line, and that the entities above that line are going to be more challenged and more risky for the adversaries to go after. But the adversaries also recognize the bottom side of that cyber poverty line. Some of the smaller companies, perhaps some startups, who don't think they have the revenue to make the sufficient investment. And our adversaries go to those companies and been more successful below the cyber poverty line than they have been above the cyber poverty line. That's a problem for all of us. We can't just sit above the cyber poverty line and say, shame on you below. We are connected. Again, back to that strategic environment of interconnectivity, complexity, and competitiveness. So the problem below the poverty line is a problem for those above the poverty line. We have to figure that out. It might be some mix of cybersecurity as a service. I've been made aware of a large entity who has worked with a secondary power supplier and is not as confident in that entity's cybersecurity posture, so that larger entity is providing cybersecurity for that smaller entity. We have to take a look at things like that. Also concerned about state, local, tribal, and territorial entities in that same concept. When I was growing up in the military, the federal government always was there to protect us against nation-state actors, always. It's a little different in cybersecurity right now. As I talked about, with those adversaries that are placing our critical infrastructure at unacceptable risk, they're going after my small hometown in Kansas. They're going to your hometowns, wherever it is. And we need to figure out how to continue to support those state, local, tribal, and territorial entities that are going up against nation-state actors.
I think that's good advice. I think we have time for one or two more questions. There's one I really want to get to because there's a lot of buzz around town focused on CIRCIA, the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act. CTA was among the industry associations that submitted comments. And mainly what's generating a lot of buzz is that companies and organizations that have traditionally not thought of themselves as critical infrastructure are finding themselves in the crosshairs of that proposed rulemaking. And certainly no one disagrees that there are increasing incidents and old regimes won't support today's challenges. But for those members of ours that don't consider themselves critical infrastructure, it's raised some questions around the scope of this NPRM. What does your office consider to be critical infrastructure, and how can the federal government create a common definition so that we can propel the necessary but risk-based public-private partnership to fight bad actors and protect victims of cyber attacks?
National Security Memorandum 22, NSM 22, out those 16 critical infrastructure sectors, so we support those. But there are additional functions that are essential to our way of life. And the obvious example of that is space, space systems. Imagine trying to function today without access to space communications or precision navigation and timing. Not a good day. So that's just an example of another area that I would put in there that needs to be protected and needs to have a level of cyber incident reporting. This is an opportunity for our partners at CISA to lead. They've had the notice of proposed rulemaking, have received that input, and they're working through that now. We'll see what comes out. Knowing CISA leadership as well as I do, they're going to consider CTA and other inputs that they got. Again, this is an opportunity to lead. ONCD is a member of the Cyber Incident Reporting Council, the CIRC, and there's recognition of the need for the United States government to do better on cyber incident reporting. I think it was September 23, there was a report that came out of the CIRC that talked about 40 different reporting requirements, and also recognition that at least 10 more would come forward. Also recognition was that's too many. So I expect that CIRCIA, under CISA's leadership that was given to DHS by Congress, is going to rectify that. So we will see.
We'll look forward to seeing what comes out of the final rule. So final question, and it's an easy one. You're now just over 6 months into this role. What's been your most proudest accomplishment so far, and what are you most looking to accomplish in the months ahead?
Again, my nature, I apologize to my staff. I won't be proud until we're done, and we won't be done. We won't be done in this job. Again, we just won't. But I'm honored to serve with this team. It's a group of patriots that's focused on making our lives better, but we're going to keep charging ahead. And when we retire, perhaps we can be proud. But I'm grateful for the opportunities, grateful for the team that I'm serving with, and we just got to keep moving. The big things that are ahead, I could say, implement the President's National Cybersecurity Strategy. That's too easy, that's too high level. Really focused on continuing leading the federal ecosystem, bringing coherence to the fabulous teammates that we have. We need to continue to support the sector risk management agencies, those government entities that are working with the private sector on our critical infrastructure, and that was reflected in that joint budget prioritization memo that we signed out with OMB. We have to continue to do that. And then I mentioned the other area of focus for us is on supporting state, local, tribal, and territorial entities as they go up against nation-state actors. An example of that that's a priority for us is cybersecurity for K through 12 schools. We've been working with CISA and the FBI and state and local, tribal, territorial governments and school districts and schools to help them enhance their cybersecurity posture. And that's going to be a big one for us.
Perfect. Well, on behalf of CTA and our members, I want to thank you for your leadership. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here and to have a robust conversation on so many topics. I want to invite our guests today to join us downstairs for a reception for the next hour. And please join me in thanking Director Coker.